Douglas Murray is a commentator who, over the years, has had a lot to say about Islam. And recently, there's been a video that's circulating where he's talking about how, in his view, Islam isn't compatible with Western values or European values. But look, the reality is there's already so much discord in the world, so much turmoil in the world, that we don't need people creating even more, especially on the basis of false pretenses and complete ignorance for that matter. And unfortunately, that's exactly what Douglas Murray has done now. And to be honest, when he's spoken about Islam, he hasn't really been educated or educated himself properly on the subject of Islam and its teachings. So let's take a look at what he said recently, and we'll dismantle it one by one.
The first of the impossible things which we're asked to believe is that Islam is a peaceful religion. It's very evidently not. No religion is entirely peaceful, but Islam is especially not peaceful. We are, of course, always reminded that there is a problem of authority within Islam, and that is certainly true. But it also means that the sources matter even more than those of any other religion, because it means that the source is what you have to go on. It means that the source will most likely always trump any organization or any individual who claims to speak for the religion more than the sources. That's why, as the professor said at the beginning, the life of Muhammad is so important if one is going to understand this. And as the professor said, when Muhammad was weak, he was more generous. When he was strong, that generosity palpably, visibly declined somewhat. And we see a similar thing in the world today, and we see a similar thing, I would argue, not only in Islamic societies, but within Islamic communities in European societies. When Islam is in a minority, it speaks a very great deal about minority rights. We cannot help noticing that when Islam is in a majority, or at least in a position to rule, those minority rights go out of the window. Minority rights of sexual minorities, the minority rights of religious minorities, and so on. And if you doubt that, I would urge you to consider one particular source, which if there is an authority within the Muslim world you might turn to, and that is the University of Al-Azhar in Cairo.
All right, so let's get right into it. And let's actually do something which Douglas Murray hasn't been able to do. He talks a lot about sources, and he's right that when we're talking about Islam especially, we should go directly to the source and look at the original sources. The original source of Islam is the Holy Quran. But he talks a big game because he hasn't even once mentioned any verse of the Holy Quran, let alone any tradition from the life of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. So he said that we need to go to the original sources, but then what does he present? Al-Azhar University in Egypt? Since when has that been an original source of Islam? So Douglas Murray's entire, conversation about Islam, his entire understanding about Islam is based on Al-Azhar University. Maybe he should open up the Holy Quran first and read its teachings before he actually starts talking about Islam or pretending to know what Islam teaches. Now, Douglas Murray says that Islam does not condone the freedom of speech or does not foster within its teachings the freedom of speech. But again, a very, very basic study of Islam's teachings shows you that in its primary source, the Holy Quran, it's been taught that there is no compulsion in religion. Then what better teaching could there be to foster freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of any sort for that matter, right? When it comes to having your own choice about how to lead your life and the decisions that you make. There is no compulsion in matters of religion is a very, very clear-cut statement that's been made in the Holy Quran. So these don't, to me at least, and I'm sure to any reasonable person, don't sound like teachings which stifle any sort of freedom of speech. Look, when the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was commanded by God to take up arms in defense, in self-defense, it wasn't to spread Islam, as some people have a misconception, that, Islam was spread by force. When God commanded the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, to take up arms, it was so that he could protect synagogues and churches and temples and places of worship of all different types of faith. There's no better embodiment of Islam than the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. And there's this famous incident, but it fits so perfectly here, we can't go without mentioning it, where there was a Muslim man and a Jewish man who were quarreling. And, the Jewish man was saying that, Moses, peace be upon him, is superior to Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. And, they had a back and forth, and the Muslim man struck the Jewish man. Now, when this report went to the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and they both presented their cases, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, took the Jewish man's side. And he said to the Muslim, he said, don't give me superiority over Moses, peace be upon him, and thereby disrupt the peace of society here that we have in the city of Medina. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. We can take a look at what Karen Armstrong, a British author, has said. And she says that it wasn't Islam that stifled the freedom of speech or the freedom of religion. It was actually the West. When we look at the time of the Crusades, Europe had this obsession with intellectual conformity, and it punished deviants who did not conform to their way of thinking. And then the torment that Protestants and Catholics both faced at the hands of each other during the times of the Crusades are well documented. What part did Islam have to play in that? So when we look at Islam and the society that was established under Islamic rule in the time of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and his caliphs that came after him, his successors, and then we look at, let's say, the time of the Crusades, we see a stark difference. And at the time of the Crusades, where people like Karen Armstrong herself admits that it wasn't Islam that stifled religious freedom or the freedom of expression and thought and speech, but it was actually the West and European philosophy. There's another point that Douglas Murray makes here, and honestly, it's silly to say the least. He tries to purport that the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and by extension Islam, was very generous when he was in a relatively weaker state, when he had not, when Islam had not yet spread and he had not yet come into power or into a position of leadership. But then when he did, then that generosity no longer existed. It seems that Douglas Murray hasn't even studied history, because whether, you agree with Islam's teachings or you don't, historians have, quite unanimously for that matter, accepted the amazing standard of morals which the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, had, both at a time of, relative weakness and at a time of strength. And this is something which is unique to the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, has been attested to by so many different Orientalists and so many different writers. And when it comes to the generosity of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, there's no shortage of incidents. There's this one time where a man said that he saw the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, had more sheep and more goats than even the Caesar or the Khosrows. And instead of keeping them for himself, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, gave all of that to a single man. And upon seeing this, the man said that this shows me, this proves to me unequivocally that you truly are a prophet of God, because there is no one more generous than you. And the generosity of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, wasn't just limited to material things. Let's look at, if we were talking about when he came into power, when he marched with 10,000 Muslims into Mecca, the very city that had tormented him and exiled him. He walked in a position of power, and he was now being accepted as the leader of not only Mecca, but essentially all of Arabia. And as he walked in with this power, he announced quite unanimously that there will be no blame on anyone and that everyone is forgiven. There was a certain group of people who the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, had said that, if they were found, then they should be sentenced to death because of their war crimes and the abhorrent atrocities that they had committed against other people. Even those people, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, forgave when they came to him seeking forgiveness. One of them was a man named Habar. And not only had he committed war crimes and atrocious actions, but he had committed them against the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him himself. Because Habar was the one who attacked the Holy Prophet Muhammad's, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him's daughter, who was pregnant at the time. And not only did that attack result in her miscarriage of the child, but she ultimately lost her own life as a result of those wounds. And the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, forgave that man. The Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was in a position of power. He had the ultimate authority to do whatever he wanted in that moment. But Douglas Murray would have people believe that the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, would be vengeful and take action against that man. But he forgave him. What greater generosity does Douglas Murray need to see in order to believe that he is completely false in his understanding of not only Islam, but history itself? During the caliphate of the second caliph of Islam, Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, Islam and the Muslim army lay siege to Jerusalem. And it was at that time that the Byzantines invited, who were in Jerusalem at the time, invited Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, to come in and establish a treaty. And in that treaty, the second caliph, Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, immediately established stipulations whereby all Christians were to be safeguarded, they were to be protected, their places of worship were to be protected, their crosses were not to be broken or to be meddled with. And he also stipulated, as a general rule, that there shall be no compulsion of religion. He established religious freedom as one of his very first acts as the conqueror, as the ruler at that time of Jerusalem even. And this was all in light of the teachings of Islam and the teachings taught by the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. So let's be careful when it comes to listening to these types of people. And if we want to learn about Islam, then let's actually go to the sources of Islam.